God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath in it, I give you every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Second reading from the New Testament, Romans 8, 18 to 27. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? Who hopes for what already he has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. And he who watches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints in accordance with God's will. This is the word of the Lord.
Alrighty, well, we get back into the letter to the Romans, and we're just beginning now to come to what I would call the great grand plan of the whole of history, really, and the whole of salvation and everything that the Bible is about. Actually comes to its zenith here in this part of the letter to the Romans, here starting here and right through chapters 9, 10 and 11, where we begin to see the big plan. And it's a big plan which even people in the church often don't see it or recognise what's really going on, because we've been so sidetracked with the idea of our personal salvation and going to heaven and so on, that we miss the big thing that salvation is really all about, which is about the restoration of all of creation, which is an extraordinary thing. And speaking of creation, I need to talk to you about the ground cuckoo shrike. How many people here know what a ground cuckoo shrike is? Okay, 3 people. That's pretty good. That's above average, I'd have to say. The ground cuckoo shrike is a bird. It's about that big. It's grey. It's got black on its wings, apparently. I've never seen one, much to my chagrin. It's a very irritating thing that I haven't seen one of these birds, because it's actually not that uncommon. It's not a particularly rare bird. It's not particularly common either, and you have to go out into the arid zone to see one. And I have spent untold weeks out in the outback of New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia and Victoria, where they live. I've driven tens of thousands of kilometres on actual bird watching trips, and I've never seen one. It's become my nemesis bird. I hate it. I just, when I finally do see it, I'll probably shoot it. But every bird watcher has a nemesis bird. A nemesis bird is that bird that you've tried really hard to see and you just can't see it. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you sweat, you bleed. Oh look, people think bird watching is a benign pursuit where you go out and go, oh look at the birds, how lovely. No, it's nothing like that. It's competitive, there's sweat, there's blood, there's money that's spent. It costs me now to get a new bird on my list, it costs me around about $1,000 on average. Used to be free when I first started. I'd just go out in the backyard and look at that. And I could tick a new species off my list. But now I have to go to some remote place in the Kimberleys or somewhere like that. I have to climb up a tall mountain through Spinifex and get there on the crack of dawn. And then, even then, not guaranteed I'm going to see it. And so it's kind of a big deal. But here's the thing. The harder it is to see, the more the joy when you do finally get to see it. I remember when I first saw my first, more common birds around Adelaide, say like a eastern rosella. Nice looking bird, beautiful bird. In fact, people from overseas see an eastern rosella, which you commonly get in your backyard, and their heart nearly stops and they say, "What? Look at this spectacular bird just sitting there in your backyard." And you go, "Oh, yes, the eastern rosella. No big deal," But sometimes a little brown bird that's nearly, very nondescript, but very rare. I mean, you get to see one of those, if you're a bird watcher, it's kind of a big deal. And so the harder it is to see, the longer it takes to see it, the greater the joy when you finally do get to see it. Actually reminds me of a quote from Pride and Prejudice. Is everyone familiar with Pride and Prejudice? All the ladies are yes, all the men are go. But near the end of the story, Miss Elizabeth, the main female protagonist in the story, has visited the site of her maybe lover's country manor, Mr. Darcy's home, or mansion, should I say. And when Mr. Darcy happens upon her, he says, "I hope you're not displeased with Pemberley," that's the name of the mansion. And Elizabeth says, "Not at all." And Darcy says, "Then you approve of it then?" And she says, "Very much. I think there are few who would not approve." And Darcy says, "But your good opinion is rarely bestowed and is therefore all the more worth the earning." I remember I had a lecturer like that who very rarely gave distinctions on essays. It was like only maybe 1 or 2 students a year would get a high distinction. So if you got a high distinction from him, it was worth more than a high distinction than anyone else. And Paul wants to say something along those kind of lines concerning the thing that God is doing, that yes, for now we're going to suffer. We suffer now. We suffer in this life, and life is frustrating and difficult. But he says that the frustration is not going to be the end of the story. In fact, he goes on and says, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." In the same way that I get great joy with seeing a bird that I haven't seen that's been really frustrating, the frustration is not without an end. In fact, the frustration is get wiped out, and it seems like nothing when you finally get to, see the rare bird or get the thing that you've been longing for, whatever it might be. And Paul is saying that, yes, we suffer now, but our present sufferings aren't even going to be worth comparing with the glory that's going to be revealed in us one day. And in fact, he even says that the word suffering there is all kinds of suffering, not just persecution, but suffering in your health, suffering in your family, suffering in your emotions, whatever it is. Every kind of suffering is not worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed in us in the fullness of time. But then he goes on and says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. Now, there's a lot going on in that passage, but he's really saying that expectation and frustration is not just in you and me, but it's in all of creation, in the trees and the moss and the ground, in the sky. It's in everything around us. There's this level of frustration that's going on. And the reason for that is that the whole of creation has been subjected to this frustration because of the fall of humanity. When human beings were created, as we had read to us from Genesis, we were created in the image of God. We were sons of God, proxies of God. We were, as I said last week, the term son of God means that you have the authority of God to rule. And we were meant to care for the creation. And in fact, it says in that passage, in the NIV at least, it says that we were created in the image of God so that we might rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. That's the reason we're created in the image of God. And that's the reason we are called sons of God. We're in the family of God, which means that we have royal dignity and authority and we're meant to not just rule it for our own ends, but to rule it the same way God would rule it, which is to care for it and to replenish it and restore it and renew it and to lift it up. A good gardener glorifies their garden by fertilising it and weeding it and doing all those things. And then eventually the garden bestows glory back on the gardener. When people walk past and say, wow, what an amazing garden. No one's ever said that about my garden, but nonetheless. And we were meant to do that for the whole of creation. But of course, when we fell out of our place and we ourselves experienced frustration, then the whole of creation experienced frustration along with us. And so frustration reigns supreme. So powerful is this frustration that in verse 22 he goes on and says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present day. So he says that creation is groaning. And we're part of that creation. We groan with creation, but creation groans with us as well. And the Greek word that Paul uses here for groan, I looked it up in my lexicon, and it says that it means to give vent to curious and censorious feelings. Well, I was none the wiser for reading that. So then I had to go to my dictionary to find out what curious and censorious feelings are. And curious means complaining and frustration giving rise to moaning or whining. You ever had a whinge? Because of the state of the world? Well, that's exactly what he's saying here. And he's saying the whole of creation is complaining and is frustrated, giving rise to moaning and whining. And then censorious means to be severely critical and disapproving, or to have a sense that things are just not right. Now, I'm not telling you something you don't know, obviously. You know that. You know you've experienced, we all experience this. We experience this when we just look at the creation around us. I experienced this just yesterday. Kathy, my wife, has been raising frogs in our backyard. We've got a little frog pond, and she collects the eggs, and then she keeps them safe from the predators, and then we get these native frogs, little tadpoles, and it takes about a year for these tadpoles to change into frogs. And so they have to be looked after and fed with boiled lettuce and all that kind of thing for the whole year. And she'd spent 6 months looking after these tadpoles, and one of the other teachers at the school had tadpoles, and she put the tadpoles in her aquarium and they died. And so Kathy offered to give her a whole bunch of tadpoles to replace them, which she did, and the next day they were all dead. And it turns out that this teacher had washed out her aquarium with detergent, and the detergent killed them. And I felt censorious and and curious feelings, I can tell you right then, about that teacher. I thought, what were you thinking, And these poor little frogs died. Now, they're just a bunch of tadpoles, but we've all experienced that, the frustration of that, when you see something that is being destroyed when it shouldn't be. And everything from weeds in your garden and the extinction of beautiful creatures to famine and war. I mean, I feel that about, Ukraine right now. It just seems ridiculous. It's causing frustration, and the stupidity of it is beyond belief. And what Paul's saying, you feel that, but so does all creation. The trees are feeling that. Behind our back, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea are having a whinge, saying, these humans, when are they going to get it together? They're wrecking the place. And that's true, we're wrecking the place. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of creatures out there who would be really happy if we all just up and died. But of course, back in the story of creation, it says that when God created human beings, he said it is very good. Up until then it was good, but when he created human beings, it's very good. But right now we're not experiencing that very good because human beings have fallen. But when human beings are restored, it won't just be good, it'll be very good again. And the creation will be released from its frustration. But this frustration that we're feeling and the creation is feeling is not in vain. Certainly not in vain like my search for the ground cuckoo shrike, but Paul goes on to say it's painful but not pointless. So in Romans 8:22 again, he says, "For we know that the whole of creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present time." In other words, yes, it's painful, but it's painful in the same way that having a baby is painful or being pregnant is painful, apparently. I mean, I've watched it, but I haven't experienced it, you know what I mean? But I've recently seen my daughter-in-law. She's not a happy pregnant person. Some people glow when they're pregnant. Well, she was not glowing. She was censorious and curious, I've got to say. During her pregnancy, she had high blood pressure and every drama you can imagine. She couldn't sleep at night and couldn't stay awake during the day, and she had a lot of pain and Braxton Hicks contractions, and her hip joint would suddenly give way and she'd fall over, all this kind of thing. It was frustrating, but it's not pointless. Even though it's painful, it's not pointless. And that's what Paul is saying. The pain we're experiencing now is like a pregnancy, painful, but it's going somewhere and it's producing something and it's going to have a good outcome. C.S. Lewis, in the movie Shadowlands. Have you ever seen Shadowlands, the movie? Yeah, it's with, what was the actor? Yeah, Anthony Hopkins played the part of C.S. Lewis. Yeah, and it was really well done and great story. And it was the story of him marrying this American woman who he met. And she was suffering from cancer. And eventually, tragically, she died very young. And he took on her son as his adopted son. And of course, he was in grief. But he said to her, or said to him rather, the pain now is part of the joy later. And I think that's exactly what Paul is saying. The pain now is attached to the joy later. In fact, we can't have the joy later unless we have the pain now. The pain now is producing something. It's painful, yes, we acknowledge that. It's frustrating, it's annoying. It can give you a stress headache. It's so irritating. And yet, something is coming out of it. This pregnancy is producing something beautiful. And when the baby is born, mothers tell me the pain is forgotten. That wouldn't happen with men, I can tell you. We would remember. But apparently there's actually a drug that gets pumped into your bloodstream that makes you forget. So I've heard. Just as well, I reckon, because there'd only be one child in every family otherwise. So what's it producing? What's this pain producing? Well, Paul says that the creation, this pain that we're experiencing now, the outcome of it's going to be that one day human beings are going to be restored to their proper place as the children of God, as the royal family, as the rulers of creation. And when that happens, creation will be set free from its bondage to decay. Death will be gone. And it will be, just like I read from Isaiah 11, the lamb and the wolf will lie down together. And the child will play with the lion. And there'll be no more conflict. There'll be no more war. There'll be no more breakdown of relationships. And most importantly, there'll be no breakdown of relationship between human beings and God, and between human beings and one another, and us and creation. But now, let me read the same passage out of the Message translation, which I think brings it forward very potently. Verse 21, he says, "Until both creation and all creatures are ready and can be released at the same moment into the glorious times ahead. Meanwhile, the joyful anticipation deepens. All around us we observe a pregnant creation. The difficult times of pain throughout the world are simply birth pangs. But it's not only around us, it's within us. The Spirit of God is arousing us within. We're also feeling the birth pangs." So right now we're experiencing the first inkling of what will be. One day our wait will be over and the new creation will finally arrive in all its fullness, when we get glorious new bodies and a glorious and interesting vocation. Like this idea that many people have of living on a cloud with a harp and wings, of course, is ridiculous. It's a Greek idea, it's not Christian. The Christian idea is one of actually having a job to do. We're not going to be having an eternal holiday, we're going to be having an eternal vocation. We're called to something. We've got a job, we're going to be doing interesting work. Like, I love gardening, but imagine that times a million. And I know a farmer gets satisfaction when they work hard and they produce a crop. Or an orchardist, tills the soil and looks after and they finally get the trees heavy laden with fruit. Well, you're going to be spending eternity bearing fruit on all kinds of levels. And in fact, we can't even imagine what it's going to be like, which is why every single mention of the life to come in the scriptures, Old and New Testament, is all metaphoric, because it's impossible to describe what cannot be described or to put into words the ineffable glories of the world to come. And yet the glory is there, and we have a sense of it, which is also at the same time creating the frustration that it's not here. You wouldn't have frustration. The only reason you have frustration is because it's true. If it wasn't true, there'd be no frustration. Like if I go fishing, I don't get frustrated if I'm out around about, Uluru somewhere. I don't get frustrated about the bad fishing because there is no fish. But if I go to the West Coast and I go fishing and I don't catch anything, it's frustrating. And the reason you get frustrated, and the reason the whole of creation is frustrated, is because the truth is that it's meant to be something else. And every part of creation knows it. You know it, the fish know it, the birds know it, the trees know it. And so the final destination, the final outcome of this whole thing is adoption into the family of God, being resurrected in new and glorious bodies like the body of Christ, and then ruling the world as proxies of God and restoring the creation to the original intention, which was to Edenize the earth. And God never gave up on that plan. God keeps his promises and he keeps going after his goal. And that goal is that we would be restored so that we can rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air in a beautiful, protective way, making it, glorifying the creation. And again, C.S. Lewis, in his essay from The Weight of Glory, says, "Apparently then, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but in fact is the truest index of our real situation. And to be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honour beyond all our merits, and also the healing of that old ache." So the old ache, the frustration that we have when we see war, when we see creation being destroyed, when we see human beings facing tragedy, that old ache, the reason it exists is because we know it's not right and we know that it's going to be replaced one day. And when the Holy Spirit comes to us, he gives us a taste of what is yet to come, which is why Paul finishes this passage here that we had read out to us in Romans 8, And verse 26, he says, "In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know how we ought to pray, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts," so God is the heart searcher, which is a nice title. "The heart searcher knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God." In other words, right now, the Spirit is putting in you a taste of things to come, giving shape to your prayers, and even giving shape to your wordless groans, that none of this suffering that you experience now is in vain. It's going somewhere, just like a pregnancy. So be encouraged that tragedy and pain is joined to the joy that will be one day. It's worth it. Amen.